Call to order this meeting of the Underhill Planning Commission on Thursday, April 20th. There's no public here, so I'm assuming there's no public comment.
Unless, public.
Oh, you're public, that's true. For a bit.
No comment.
Any comment? No? Okay. Does anyone have any additions to the agenda? Nope. Approval of minutes.
Yeah, so those have been up for the last
They're the ones
from April 6th, and those are the ones you should have right there.
Yeah.
So
it was just the 6th?
Yeah, just
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
okay.
We got caught up the time prior to that, and then yeah.
Okay. Did anyone have any? Did everyone get a chance to look at it?
I haven't had a chance to look at them. Sorry to say.
No, that's okay. So I think that means we punt.
Yeah.
On the minutes.
Fine by me. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to look it over.
Yeah, yeah, of course. There's no rush.
Yeah.
Based on our previous track record.
Not even totally required. So.
Okay, so that takes us to executive session, actually, right?
Yeah.
So
it does. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you had to interview me first.
Oh, is that? Oh, yeah. That's.
I mean, we
thank
can
you.
do the
No, you're right.
public.
Thank you. The interview's public. Thank
Yeah.
you. I always get confused about when to go to executive session. Well, clearly, Carolyn has a solid handle on the logistics. Who has questions? Or do you have questions too, both directions? Anyone?
No, I'm fascinated. I'd love to.
I know. I noticed one of the.
I could do this from home too.
You can.
Bad days that I just.
For sure. For sure.
No. I mean, that's partly why well, first of all, being chair was enough time off after a while, but we didn't have any of this.
Yeah, a lot of new
and
technology.
I think for a lot of people, you know, at the end of a work day, it's just like.
Yeah, for sure.
Even though I live less than a mile away.
Does anyone have any questions? I know everyone's pretty familiar with your background, obviously. No? Do you have any questions?
No, but I'd like one question.
How long did you do it the last run? How long were we on the committee or the commission?
13 years, 15 years.
Are you willing to
Do you
commit
have
to a
my-
similar tenure this time?
13 years.
So I was in Nick's job for 5 years. And then I took a year or two off to go to nursing school. I was back and forth. So roughly 2006. I don't know, I threw out my town reports last year.
That's impressive.
Until whenever my, whether it was 2019 or 2020, whenever my term expired, I did not continue. So.
Gotcha. Okay, well,
What inspired you to rejoin, want to rejoin?
Oh, because I talked to David and I talked to Lee and I always enjoyed it, but work got too hectic. And when I had been vice chair and then chair, it was just a lot of work. And the group wasn't exactly cohesive at that time. So as chair, it was not fun.
Oh, thankfully that's not the group now, for sure. So, yeah.
My job is doing a lot of interacting and what I sometimes call babysitting. So I did not need it at 6:30 at night. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, were you on the board here or chairperson when we actually had the zoning regs passed? Yeah. I think
Multiple times.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Several iterations, and then that's the minute they're passed, you realize, well, the minute they're in the progress of being passed, you see all the screw ups.
Yeah, of course. Huh. Well, you're gonna get a chance to follow those now.
Yeah, no, it might be fun at times to bring up the history.
For sure, 100%.
Which I actually did know a fair amount, even back in '88, because as a lister, you really did have to know what the zoning regs were, because you're out assessing people's properties,
True.
having to report them.
True.
Mhm.
and things, but, you know, it was a smaller community. Not,
Yeah.
no, it was not a smaller community. It's the same size
Same size.
community.
Yeah.
But life was easier, less sophisticated then. I was a ballot clerk at that time too, and we were hand counting ballots.
Hmm.
Till very late at night. Want me to exit?
Anyone else? Sure. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
We'll get you in 1 minute.
All right.
Thank you. Does anyone? Oh, hey, Sandy. Oh, do you have any questions for Carolyn? So we don't. We were
Sandy
just going
was
to go to.
actually the one person, Sandy, David, and Lee were the only people on the board.
Oh,
I'm
We're just going to go to executive session.
Okay.
Okay.
Unless you have something you want.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Okay, see you soon, Carolyn.
This conference will now be recorded.
Too late.
All right, on schedule. Okay.
Okay. So, Nick, actually maybe now, because then we won't run over and run out of time.
Sure.
Basically, Brad mentioned to me that the village center designation needs to be renewed for the flats, and that it's our job to do it.
Yeah.
So with that, he also touched base with Nick, and Nick's like working on putting the whole package together for us before we do anything with it, but
Pretty much,
it's
yeah.
coming basically, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'll give you a little preview. Brad's right, and that's a process that is started by the planning commission. So just to review, it's a designation that's given by the state, administered by I think the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and it basically makes certain property owners eligible for certain tax breaks. There's pretty much no drawback to it, and the only real cost is a little bit of commission and staff time to prepare an application. But it's something that is incumbent upon this body to do because statute says that you guys have to be the ones to get the ball rolling on redesignating it. And in the process, that also means that there's a chance to make a few decisions about the exact boundaries of it, and also whether or not the commission wants to take things a step further in a couple directions. Things like neighborhood growth areas are slightly more committed versions of this, and that's something that was probably worth discussing while you guys are putting the application together. But I've got a few more materials to put together so that we can all sit down and wrap our heads around it all at once. I think that would probably be the best way to go to start the process. The other complication is that it's a shared designation with the town of Jericho. So I need to reach out to my counterparts over there and talk to them about what the process was last time. And maybe, Carolyn, you could help out if you know anything about this, because it seems to be a pretty unusual thing, but obviously the state, clearly made an allow this to go happen last time. So I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. I just need to figure out what process we need to do in order to make sure that happens, and if there's any collaboration with Jericho that needs to happen formally, or if it's just we can run like things kind of parallel. So I'll look at.
Will that be next meeting?
I'm hoping to be able to pull together everything that I need next meeting. The state has a lot of resources to make it pretty easy to understand. It's really just a matter of talking to the folks at Jericho to see if they've done any work on this and if they know anything more than I do, and then answering those questions. So.
Is there a deadline?
There is a deadline.
It's in the fall?
August.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
August.
August.
Oh,
Yep, end of August.
Okay.
And they'll extend it if we miss the deadline by up to 6 months, but probably best not to miss the deadline because that's just more work for everyone. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to get this done by August.
Okay.
Yeah,
When was the last designation?
8 years ago. It's an 8-year cycle, like town plans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm playing down.
yeah, town plans now, yes.
Amen.
Yeah. The center's designation was done in 2017, so it'll be a little bit longer before we get to
Not too much longer.
Not too much longer. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we sold this one and then, okay.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Really just a heads up. Two other quick things before David launches us into his new version here, if you don't mind, David. Brad asked me, Brad, I don't know, was Brad talking to you? Is that how he knew we were working?
Yeah.
Okay. So he mentioned a few these are very specific feedback items, just so they're in everyone's head, not just mine. Do we include garage space or just livable space if an ADU is like in the same building as a garage? Which I think is a really good question. So maybe, I don't know if that's something we need to address in here, and just obviously, I'm not trying to hijack this, we can do it wherever it comes up. Second is 30% for the ADU above grade? And we should make sure that's clear. Is it just the square footage that's above grade? And random feedback from Brad, he thought we should use the accessory setback limits, whatever that's worth. So that's what he thought.
Accessory
It's
structure.
livable space,
Yes.
is what it is.
Yeah, he apparently, again, just Brad feedback, he thought we just want to make sure that's super clear in here. So maybe we think it already is, but those are the comments Brad gave me.
Yeah, well, I think it's clear, it's livable space, basically.
Yeah, so it's 30%, whether it's 2 stories or 1 story. Is
It's
that,
30%, whatever.
Well, it says total habitable floor area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have a cellar, it's not finished off, that's not habitable.
Anyway, that's the.
Yeah, I mean, I would basically look at it the same way I look at, charging for square footage on a permit application. So if someone gives me a permit application for a single family home, often there's going to be a garage space, there's going to be porch space, maybe some unfinished basement, maybe something like some sort of crawl space above a ceiling or something like that. None of that is going to be counted as living space. Everything else might be. So I would just kind of go off of that. And if there was ever a confusion about it, I'd probably just defer to the lister's card because they catalog that stuff down to the square foot. And so that's kind of how I would go off of it. So if I got an application for an ADU and I'm like, wow, that's huge compared to how big I know this house is or how big it looks, I could always go to the lister's cards and do a quick calculation and figure out how that goes. I mean, that's how I would handle it if the commission thinks it's advantageous to make the language more explicit so that everyone else reading it would make the same inference that I just did, then I don't see why that would be a problem.
Yeah, there's some language somebody wants to add, we could discuss that, but I don't think it's necessarily so.
Yeah, I don't even know if Brad was, this is just feedback from Brad. He wasn't like saying we needed to do anything or he thought we should do anything. It's just his comments.
Would you be able to read the first item again that Brad sent?
Yep. It was, right.
the garage space?
Oh yeah, the garage, it was the garage.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand that.
Well, this is the exact scenario he gave me. He was saying, let's say that, I think this might actually apply to Brad, if I've not been to his house, but, so let's say you have a garage, 2 garage bays, and then you build an ADU on top of it to live in. He's saying he thought we should be super clear that if this is what our intent is, that the 30% rule only applies in that scenario to the upstairs, because that's the ADU, and you wouldn't include the garage.
Right.
So it'd be the same as like a basement,
Yes.
not livable space, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yes, makes sense.
Because we're already talking living space, so it's apples to apples.
Mhm.
So, do we want to go ahead with, what I added here on the, ADUs, part B? I changed the language a little bit from what I had submitted right after the last meeting. But I wanted to make it more in line with what the zoning regulation says and what the language is. So I changed non-complying, which is what the state uses for certain elements, to a non-conforming, which is usually a language that's used for not conforming with the permits, basically. So I thought we could take care of this problem that we had last time about, an accessory structure that's outside the boundaries, basically for a single-family dwelling. And what to do in that situation if you want to have an accessory dwelling unit within something. Well, that's not conforming to the permits for a single family dwelling. So if it doesn't conform to the regulations for a single family dwelling, then I think it has to go through the conditional use process just to keep everything consistent through the zoning regs. I don't think we can do it any other way. If the accessory dwelling unit is proposed to go into a structure that is within a setback, some structures are allowed to go in the setbacks, but a dwelling is not supposed to go into the setback, basically. So a proposal to put an accessory dwelling into the structure that is within the setback, that would not be in conformance with the regulations necessary or the regulations that apply to a single family dwelling. So
And
I
chances
see
are,
puzzled looks.
the chances are the DRB would have to reject it because that would be making it more non-conforming.
Yeah, unless we're granting it a waiver.
But because of the whole accessory,
Yeah, I mean, so I think what you're saying, Dave, sorry, I'm just grabbing my copy of the regs here, is that basically, so to sort of like put this in grounded terms, you're saying like, let's say someone has a garage or a studio located within, within the set, like it's permitted properly as such, as a studio or a garage, accessory structure meets the setbacks for a garage or something like that, which are lower than the setbacks, shorter than the setbacks for a single family home. And someone wanted to redevelop that into an ADU, then they would have to approach the DRB for a conditional use permit for that ADU.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we have to do it that way. If we want to make an accessory dwelling that's in a setback more lenient, then we would have to do a whole bunch of other changes, basically, it seems. And I don't want making things more restrictive, but I think we do have to keep things consistent. And so I think we have to identify a non-conforming accessory dwelling unit and allow a process, basically. But the process has to go through a conditional use review with the development review board. That costs money and it takes time, but I don't see that we can get around it any other way.
Would this also, like in the villages, there's a lot of lots that are non-conforming.
Right.
So does this automatically exclude any ADUs from those
You would have to
homes?
go to the DRB, right?
And that,
And that's not it.
so you get into the conditional use approval. I know this is.
We're not making it any easier.
No, that isn't making
No,
it
it's
easier.
not.
But how do you deal with it, basically?
but the setbacks in the villages are pretty generous.
Yeah, I actually think it'd be probably worth just pulling.
Well,
up the
it's
setbacks.
different if it's a setback or if it's the lot itself is non-conforming. Our zoning is
Well,
1
the
acre.
lot can be non-conforming,
Okay,
right? Because all the lots
right.
are non-conforming in
Well,
our
we have to
villages.
change that, but yeah.
Right. But I think you were, David, referring to the structure where the accessory dwelling would be if that's non-conforming, as opposed to the lot itself being non-conforming,
Okay.
which has more to do with acreage
Um,
and septic. And I mean, then you get into the whole septic water situation.
So we're really
Well,
just talking about
non-conforming
the
uses.
setbacks.
Non-conforming use is allowed to be continued. I wonder if,
But you can't make it more are you making it more non-conforming?
You would.
You would be, right? If it's not, is that right?
Well, think about it like this. If you wanted to build, I'm pulling up the setbacks so we can speak a little more concretely about this. But if you wanted to, let's say you have let's talk about our largest district here, the rural residential. If you wanted to build a house, you have parcel of land in the rural residential district. It's conforming. It was just created by the DRB. It's fresh. It's ready to build. You would have to place your house 50 feet from the side and the rear of that parcel. You could, however, build an accessory structure, such as a barn, up to 20 feet, anywhere within 20 feet of the side and rear. So to hit that 30 from the road. So the question is basically, could that barn, would it be fair to take that hypothetical barn that you built 20 feet from the edge of the property and turn it into an accessory dwelling unit?
no,
Well, that's not the hypothetical I was thinking through, but I understand where you're going. Because in your scenario, sorry, hear me out for a second, because I want to pick up on what Sandy was saying, or I think she was saying before we move on. In your scenario, there's probably still room on that lot because you picked rural residential and they're pretty big.
Mhm.
So let's say it is meeting the minimum lot size because it's, so you have 3 acres to fit a new ADU somewhere else.
Yeah.
Ignoring cost for a second. Right?
Ignoring
So you don't
cost.
have to use the barn. You could
Yeah.
put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
I feel like part of what Sandy's saying is because the lots and the flats are the center because they're smaller.
Yeah.
Let's say you're on a 1 acre lot, you don't have a ton of choice. So if the lot's already non-conforming, or maybe I'm behind, I feel like we're basically saying with this language, you almost can't put an ADU on that lot because it's
Without
non-conforming.
conditional use.
It'll become more non-conforming.
Yeah.
So it's got to go through conditional use
Yeah.
to put any ADU anywhere on the lot,
Yeah, I think it's
which for me is different.
well,
yeah.
there's a non-conforming lot and then a non-conforming use. A non-conforming lot
It's too small.
would be allowed to have a straight permit for a dwelling on it, I believe.
Uh,
A non-conforming lot
yeah.
would be allowed to have a straight permit for a single
Um,
dwelling.
I mean,
That couldn't be denied.
potentially. I mean, you'd have yes. I mean, so a lot. So there are a number of gray areas. So if it's a lot that you couldn't create by a subdivision because it doesn't have enough access or something like that, that's all non-conforming. And then I'm thinking of the Grand Isle lot on Harvey Road, which is also non-conforming, but also impractical to build on in a lot of ways without waivers. Now they got enough waivers to make it practical to find a design that worked. My point is there's sort of shades of non-conforming. So I think the lot being non-conforming is less useful for our discussion here than whether the structure itself is non-conforming. And I guess I was kind of trying to point out one potential, way that David's language here could trigger a conditional use review for a proposed accessory dwelling unit. Another way was what Sandy seemed to be alluding to, which is that let's say you have a house that would be non-conforming because it's located within a setback, or it's on it's too close to the road or something like that to be permitted under the current rules. What happens when someone owning one of those wants to redevelop part of it into an ADU?
It seems like that would be let me take that back. It seems like that would be a number of lots, just like used here in Underhill Center. It seems like you'd have a lot of setback issues here for ADUs.
And that's where we want to encourage development, is in the village center. So this to me it's it's not helping the situation really.
Well, if if a dwelling is allowed as a non-conforming use, and there's certain conditions about that, that's the kind of standard that would apply to a ADU. The same standard as for the primary dwelling should apply to the ADU. So if there's a conditional use for a non-compliant or non-conforming single-family dwelling, the same thing would apply for an ADU.
So are you,
So it may be a conditional use also, but it would be the same standard basically. That's what the state is saying, that you have to apply the same standard for an ADU as you apply to the single-family dwelling.
so are you saying, just from my understanding, are you saying, let's say there's a lot in Underhill Center
Mhm.
and the house is already violating the setback, like it's 14 feet from the side. Are you saying with that ADU, so let's say the only way you could fit the ADU in is it would have to be 14, fit in 14 feet, right? Like you couldn't do it any other way. Are you saying now it would be you would go to the DRB? Is that a conditional use? I'm just trying to understand how you think.
Puzzling point. I don't know. It is a puzzling point. The state says, that an ADU has to follow the standards that are applied to a single-family dwelling, and you can't forbid having it, as long as it follows those standards.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily to be interpreted to mean that all standards that apply to a single family dwelling must apply to the ADU. Like, I think what it's saying is essentially anywhere where you're going to allow a single family home, you must allow an ADU. And here are the basic minimum standards for ADUs, and you can have those more liberal if you want. So we could have stricter standards for a single family home and more liberal standards for an ADU in the same zoning district and located on the same lot if we wanted.
The tricky thing for me here, and then I don't know, maybe we go around and get everyone's opinion. Like, I see both sides of it because it's like the rules. We're trying to increase housing, and at the same time, like if you're used to having setbacks where people aren't living within X, then I could see why people would be annoyed if all of a sudden people could put an inhabited structure.
Yeah, well, but I think that's important. It's important to remember that that's not necessarily true because just having, so it's not like if you had a house, let's say to use your example, Brian, and it was built before it had zoning, and now it turns out that the lot line that the edge of the house is 14 feet from the side lot line, making it non-conforming in the eyes of our zoning code. It doesn't mean you would get carte blanche to then fill out those 14 feet right to the lot line with whatever you want, just because it is in this loophole. What it means basically is that although it's non-conforming, we would still allow you to build and make it as long as it isn't increasing that degree of non-conformance. What we need to avoid is making it so that you don't have to go before the DRB to redevelop the back of your house in a way that is the house that is non-conforming in a way that doesn't increase that non-conformance.
But by putting a structure on it, are you making it increasingly non-conforming?
Not necessarily, because that's why the language of increasing its degree of non-conformity exists. Otherwise, we could just say if you have a non-conforming structure, you can't change it. It would be if you can find a way to build your ADU up, for instance, or build your ADU outward in a direction that doesn't build more into a setback, that should be allowed. And because it would be allowed for any other kind of development. So
it doesn't go in the setback.
as long as it doesn't go into setback. Yeah, we still wouldn't allow someone to violate setback laws just because their place is already. We're just saying like, okay, you're doing the small violation of the setback laws. We're going to ignore that as long as that doesn't change to make that setback even smaller.
So you just can't violate the setback anymore
Yeah,
than you already are.
exactly.
And
Or
you think this language covers that or does not cover it, David's language?
okay, well, we'll think about that for a second.
What do you think about this, Mark?
I think that this is too broad to necessarily mean that. I think that I think that this is good to clear up, but I think it also needs to be rephrased to be a little bit more clear.
Yeah, what would you add in there?
I would just say that like an ADU in a the proposed for a structure that is non-conforming shall not
Okay.
increase its degree of non-conformance. You know,
Trying to clarify that issue.
that's basically how I would phrase it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it does make sense, like to put that in there, because people shouldn't be able to infer some kind of carte blanche permission to like fill up a setback with an ADU because they're like, well, screw it, I already have a non-conforming house, and this language seems to allow me to just build into a setback. That would be no fun to have to,
Yeah.
to have to go police. So, yeah, I think, in order to be clear and consistent, I think just saying like, yeah, if you have a house that is non-conforming or a structure that's non-conforming, if an ADU is being proposed as part of a structure that is non-conforming, it shall not increase its degree of non-conformance.
It's not increasing the.
Yeah. So that way you could redevelop your house that is in slight, non-conformance with the setback or whatever, and do so in a way that doesn't really change the neighborhood character any more than it would if you added an addition to your house or just changed a bunch of interior walls around, like put a new back door on or something, or patio or something like that. All of which you'd be allowed to do with a non-conforming house. We just want to make it clear that doing so in the service of adding an ADU shouldn't have any extra burden, nor should it give you any extra permissions.
I
Well,
think,
that should be just a straight permit then, for that sort of a situation.
Yeah, that wouldn't need a DRB.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think someone could easily make the argument, by the way, I don't agree with this, just to be clear. I think someone could easily make the argument, you are making the lot more non-conforming in the sense that there's more stuff on it now. Like, the density of the lot has changed. In other words, the lot was already too small under the new rules, and you have a house with 4 people living in it. And now you're saying, that's true, and this lot that's sort of already too small right now, well, now I'm gonna have 8, that's ridiculous number, 6 people living.
Yeah.
Right? 4 here and 2 in the additional structure. I just don't know, like, if I hated this rule, I don't, and I'm certainly not a zoning lawyer, but could you say, oh, no, this is definitely making this lot more non-conforming. It's more dense, there's more people living on it in the same area of space.
Yeah, but the state says, if you've allowed a primary dwelling there, that you can't forbid the accessory dwelling as long as it's following basically the same standard that you set up for the single
But we
family
wouldn't
dwelling.
let you build a single family dwelling there now.
No, but you
No,
can build an addition,
But you could build
which
an
is
addition.
basically
so
what
that's
this
the same.
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just checking to see if there's any kind of
That's true.
But it's an
density
addition with water and septic capabilities for those
Yeah.
additional bedrooms.
Yeah.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to increase the overall capacity. Like, people redirect that a lot of the time. So yeah, people do that.
Because the old
That's a good
septic
point.
permits were based on number of bedrooms. and it's expected that the bedrooms were double occupancy.
Yeah, so if you're removing a bedroom, I mean, this is how I process these permits. So if you're taking a bedroom offline, essentially, if you're removing it from use in your main house and you're converting, let's just talk about like let's say an attached ADU. Then, and you can prove via a permit or a certified letter from an engineer who's inspected the system that it has sufficient flow with those new bedrooms offline, then we'll permit an ADU based on that. So and people have done that. There's actually a pending case on that as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be digging new septic fields, but if they are, then that also that septic field is probably going to be used for the primary dwelling as well, which just extends the life of the primary dwelling and the ADU, and then you can kind of amortize the cost of the septic system over the cost of living in the house and the cost of, the value of the house rising.
Septic system approved, you also have to have a replacement area.
Yeah.
So you get non-conforming lots.
Yeah.
Available space to.
All a great reason why it's imperative that we study wastewater in the same places where this would be an
Uh-huh.
issue, because that way people would have the option of tying into something instead of having to go scrambling for a place to put a septic field or a mound system.
So,
And is there-
so if this were approved, like that accessory dwelling, and then septic fails,
Mhm.
it still is the best fix, right?
Yeah, it's it's still a dwelling unit and people are living in it and it's duly permitted and everything like that. So,
Is there also language that addresses lot coverage for the ADUs and additional parking possible requirements and that additional lot or impervious surfaces?
sort of maybe and yes.
Uh-huh.
So maybe yes and maybe yes, maybe and yes. Yes, the lot coverage applies, but it would apply same as any other structure. Like, I wouldn't currently, and I don't see any reason why we should treat an ADU as anything different than a structure that would count towards the overall lot coverage. As far as, what was your second question again?
The parking requirements.
Parking requirements, yeah, we actually have
1,000 square
specific,
feet, and
yeah.
Yeah, we got into that, and I think
That might limit a lot of possibilities too with it.
We have a whole table about those and about parking minimum. So those are already addressed and we can talk about those in a second. And then as far as impervious surface, yeah, that would also count towards any new driveway or parking area would just count towards the impervious surface. And that's its own requirement on the zoning district geometric standards. So
we had some discussion about reducing parking.
we did, which is a conversation I would still be very open to to
Right.
continue. But there's, at the moment I can read them off. Also note that the state has thought a lot about changing parking requirements in, as regards to ADUs and also within areas served by sewer and water. But so far, no decisive action. I'm trying to find out.
That could be a limiting factor.
It could be.
Lot.
It could be.
Do you think that's something we should look at in conjunction with this?
If you want to try to maximize how many ADUs you can get, yeah, it'd probably be worth maybe making an exception.
Yeah, I was thinking about parking again and noticing in homes where they don't have a big parking lot, everybody just parks in the driveway and, you make it work. So why do we require so many,
Right.
Well, maybe we should look at that tonight if we get as part of this.
So currently our minimum parking requirements for an accessory dwelling is 1 per parking unit. This is on page 43 of the.
One per ADU?
1 per ADU. Yep. So that would be in addition to dwelling, single family and 2 family, which is 2 per dwelling unit. So that's if you have a single family home, got to have 2 spaces. If you have a duplex, got to have 4 spaces. If you have a single family home and an ADU, got to have 3 spaces.
Which is just defined as like so many square feet or something like that?
Yeah, adjacent to the access, devoted to parking, etc. Yeah. Those are the minimums for the, as Sandy pointed out, I've never had to examine anything for parking minimums. Just people build themselves garages or carports or enough space on the driveway to park a car if they build or renovate a home. And pretty much everything else just has enough parking already. So home businesses and stuff like that, typically there's just enough parking on the driveway to hit those minimums. Same with accessory dwelling units.
And by keeping the rules the way they are, the DRB would require that the engineering be done. It just makes it more expensive.
Yeah.
So if we're hoping to make it a little less costly.
I missed that. Sorry, Sandy, what would the DRB?
Well, if you had maybe a duplex, let's use that instead of a single family home, the design would have to accommodate the number of parking spots that
Oh.
you're requiring.
Mhm.
And so the engineers would, put in more fill, or you guys
Oh,
know.
I see what you're saying.
So it just makes it more costly than you just put in the driveway and you've got your parking spot. Anyways.
You know, about, going back to what you were talking about earlier, about
Yeah.
possibility of, or, the idea that just because the single family dwelling has certain regulations that the accessory unit doesn't necessarily follow, I think it does. And, the
Yeah.
state actually says, a bylaw may require a single family dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit to be subject to the same review.
Okay. Yeah.
So it has to be the
Yeah.
same review. And if a permit,
Yeah.
is allowed for the main dwelling, then the same applies for the accessory dwelling. If it's a conditional permit
Yeah.
for the main dwelling, then it's a conditional permit for the accessory unit. So
I mean, I hear
it's the same
word.
review process.
I hear the word may there though, not the word shall. And I mean,
What?
I heard the word may, not the
So
word
that
shall.
it could be
No,
looser.
it doesn't.
basically.
It says, the bylaw, it says may require a
Yeah.
single family dwelling to be subject.
Yeah.
Well, the may, it says later on that you can be less stringent with a
Yeah, with an ADU
Yeah.
permit. Yeah. I mean, I think that the deferral seems to be to the town to make it less stringent on the ADU if they like it to be. So I think that's kind of the question is kind of like, is that
yeah.
the best approach? And like,
Mm.
but
It seems to me that it's quite different if you have an attached ADU. That to me just seems like an addition on the house. And so a lot of the rules that would apply to an addition on a house should apply here. If it's detached, it seems to me like that's a whole different thing, especially if you're starting from ground zero up, not, converting a garage or something. And it almost seems like the rules should be different.
mhm.
And you want to have enough scrutiny for that new structure versus an addition.
Whether or not it's conforming or under any scenario or.
I don't know.
I think if you had a accessory structure like a barn or garage, you should really be able to, and it was in the setbacks, it was compliance that you should be able to convert the upstairs to an apartment, for example. I think that should be in there. I'm fine with like making the ADU comply with the main house. If it's a new thing you're building, but it seems like, I don't know, it seems like there's a lot of old barns, sheds, garages that are around it, and it doesn't really change the look of the town to convert the upstairs to an apartment.
Yeah.
If it's already there.
And the
That's
term
what stuck out to me.
Yeah, I think the term is adaptive reuse.
Yeah.
Of structures.
And then the example that
Yeah.
I think last time you talked about a resident that had a barn that they wanted to convert for a sick family member or elderly family
Yeah,
member.
that's
or
right.
something.
That's right. Yeah.
So.
How do other people feel about that? Should we have two different sets of?
Well, I think it's, I don't know, I think the standards and, I think it sort of covers what I'm saying here, if the main dwelling is, has certain standards, then if you go beyond that, then you can do that with a conditional review process.
Well, wait, so are we saying that if the house, well, let's say the house was conforming,
Yeah.
but the barn,
It's
which
not-
is already there,
Yeah.
is non-conforming,
Right.
then you should still, think what Boris is saying is you should still be able to convert that barn to an
Well,
ADU,
you'd have to go to a,
but your language would make you go through the DRB.
well, yeah, what I'm saying is either a proposed or existing structure,
Mhm.
you know, you would have to get a conditional approval if it's, you know, outside the standards.
So it's outside the standards of that, so you're referring to being outside of setback or something, what if it would conform, but it's just, it was an ADU it wasn't approved at the time, so we just had an ADU that they had built and were using as an ADU,
No, I guess I'm not following.
That does
Okay,
sound-
grandfathers, would that be approved because it would not conform to the new regulations? Or would they have to go through a review to get it approved as well? So it would technically conform under the new standards, but because it was being used previously, it didn't conform previously. That setbacks and lot coverage.
That's a historical situation then you're thinking, I guess,
Right.
that it was okay at one point, but now it's.
Or maybe it wasn't
not.
okay, so we just did it, was using it.
No, I think it's the present standards that have to apply.
Right.
You know.
So it seems like we've got sort of three categories for potential ADUs. We've got maybe four if we want to break it down farther, but we've got ones that are, hey Sherry, we've got ADUs that could be built in say four standards. We've got ADUs that could be built as an addition to an existing single family home. We've got ADUs that could be built as part of a new build structure, like the upper floor of a new barn or carriage house. You build a barn, you put an ADU up top. Then you've got your ADUs that could go in an existing barn or carriage house that, you know, was not made for that purpose, but meets all the other standards, is conforming, is a perfectly legal and permitted structure, doing its thing, being a barn, being a sugar house, whatever, but meeting its specific accessory structure setbacks and bothering no one. And then you've got ADUs that either exist or could exist, or someone wants to put in an accessory structure or whatever that is like right at the lot line, that is non-conforming.
Wait, so we have an ADU that's an addition,
Yep. Then we got an ADU that could be built,
just a new standalone ADU.
new standalone ADU.
You have
Yep.
an ADU that could go in a pre-existing structure that's
Pre-existing
fine.
conforming. Yep.
conforming.
And then what happens when someone wants to put an ADU in a pre-existing non-conforming?
For his ADU and
Structure.
pre-existing
You got an
non-conforming.
old barn, someone screwed up a survey, the survey goes 5 feet off the edge of the barn, and someone is saying, this is a great spot for me to build an Airbnb ADU, but what happens when the neighbor notices that there's a dwelling unit going in 5
Then you
feet?
have 5, because there's the other one of, it meets as a detached garage, the setbacks,
Well,
but it doesn't, according to what David's saying.
that's kind of what
It
I'm
suddenly
saying.
would be,
Yeah,
well, those are two different things.
Well,
One would be
potentially. Yeah.
it's already non-conforming,
yeah,
but the other is it's conforming for the purpose it was built,
yep.
but with the additional living space, it
Mhm.
will now make it non-conforming.
I agree, because it's an ADU addition that's conforming or non-conforming. Sorry, I just have to.
Yeah,
And then there's also a new ADU standalone.
yeah,
That could either be conforming or non-conforming.
depending on,
Because
Yeah.
the current house
Yeah.
could already be non-conforming, and you could be adding a non-conforming ADU. Sorry to make it more
Yeah.
complicated, but
I
I think there's 6.
Well, I think
yeah.
I just wanna break it down. I didn't think of 6 until you got a 5.
Next thing this town is gonna buy me is a whiteboard, so we
Yeah,
can
right.
brainstorm while we do these. I'm not kidding.
we should be able to do that.
Yeah, we should do this, for next time. So I guess, yeah, oh my God. that's even better.
Old school with the marker.
Yeah. Yeah, it's getting wet.
Let's get ARPA money before it's too late.
Oh, excellent. Hey, take a note. Drop there. So we may have more categories. I guess my question is, and my bias is, how do we, or should we collapse some of those categories?
Well, we have to, we
And
can't
I
have
think
6.
Right. So I'm like, yeah, so I'm kind of thinking how we do that. I kind of like where this was going, where I could see there being a use for conditional use here, for conditional use review for one of the more extreme ones that I mentioned, which was like someone has a non-conforming accessory structure and they want to put an ADU in that thing. That could be an issue. But then I think it's a bit grayer, and I think it requires more like attention right now on what happens when someone, let's say someone 5 years ago built a barn and they're in, because this is a real situation that could happen. They're in the, Mount Mansfield Scenic Preservation District. You can put it 20 feet close to the line, but with a 75-foot setback for a dwelling, thank you, Boris, the next dwelling is going to be 95 feet minimum away from this structure that someone is proposing to build an ADU in. And I think it's worth asking, like, is that sufficient for like a one-bedroom, essentially a one-bedroom apartment? Would 95 feet minimum be sufficient setback? Or does commission think that it should be a full 150 feet and apply the setback standard for a single family dwelling to all ADUs? Yeah.
So you're saying like, if somebody were like, oh, I'm going to build this garage, but then it's got an attic space, and its setback is what, 25?
20 feet. Yeah.
And then 2 years later, they're like, oh, I want to put an apartment upstairs.
Yeah, exactly. I want to put an apartment
That's a
upstairs.
loophole. That's them exploiting the
So,
potential.
Well, I mean,
through a conditional use, I mean, they'd have to be approved by the Development Review Board. And they would send out letters to the neighbors, saying, we are doing this, it's going to be within the setback next to your property. Do you have any objections to that?
The other option is,
But then you're making that, dwelling non-conforming by choice. You do have to change the language, or we have to agree on changing.
that's what I'm suggesting.
Because if the DRB is going to be stuck, because their hands are going to
They
be
let it
tied,
happen
because
once, then all of them.
if
do.
you're creating the non-conformity, they have to reject
The
it.
non-conformity being that there's a dwelling unit in something
Not
that's
meeting the
located.
setbacks
Yeah.
on them.
We don't
Yeah.
have to-
And unless things have
Yeah.
changed.
I mean, I would point out two things. That's one interpretation of it. Technically, our language actually says that it's the principal structure, not the primary, not a single family home specifically, or something. It's the principal structure. So I think just as it's written, I think there is room to allow an ADU to be in a structure that meets the accessory, that is duly permitted for an accessory structure. But I think the question is whether you think that sort of practice should continue, because we're going to see more ADU applications.
For me, that's not to take too big a step back, and maybe people think it's silly and we should just keep going through the categories, but like, where are we trying to get? Are we trying to have really, I don't know if this is the right phrasing, really loose ADU rules, and then we kind of solve for that, right? Like, well, sure, your barn's 10 feet away from the property line and blah, 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 that's fine, whatever. I mean, I'm just wondering if our philosophy shouldn't inform our decisions on all these, like,
Sure.
where do we want to be? If 10 is the,
There's always going to be collateral stuff that happens if you,
yeah,
like the guy's going to build a garage and then 2 years later build an apartment.
Yes.
But
yeah.
you have to let that happen, yeah.
Right, for the, like, if 10 is the, and I don't know if this is the right thought process, but if 10 is like, we want to have as many ADUs as we can, and one is, we want to do the bare minimum the state makes us, like, where are people on this metric? How do we feel about that? I don't know, should we go around and say?
Yeah, I'm probably like
I'm not using my scale, I mean, make up your own scale. Yeah, but, yeah.
I'm in more favor of trying to accommodate more housing
Mhm.
where it seems appropriate.
How do you feel, Mark?
I agree with Sandy, except when you get the denser population, then the ADU becomes less popular with your neighbors.
Right.
So what's your question again?
I'm trying to figure out what I thought would be helpful, David,
Yeah.
is because we can come up with 20 different scenarios, right? Of different things that could happen, right? And I'm wondering, where are people in general on ADUs? How liberal do we want to be on ADUs? Are we just trying to conform with the state rule and do the minimum we have to? I'm not saying that as a judgment. Is that what we're trying to do? Are we trying to get more liberal or allow more than the state does on ADUs? Because for me, that drives a lot of the decision making here, right? Like big picture.
It just gets complicated when you want to do more. Then
Oh, for sure. It will definitely get complicated. That's why, I was sort of picking up strings of like, maybe we do want to do more, or maybe some people don't want to do more. And I was just trying to figure out where we were.
How about if we do more in areas that are designated as growth areas and keep the same criteria for conservation areas and rural
I
residential?
like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a possibility for sure.
That's, yeah, I mean, I will play the devil's advocate here and
Not your
say,
turn, Nick.
I guess you're right. I didn't just speak in circle here.
Carol,
I'll point out a flaw later on, but yeah.
you can keep your list of grapes until it's your turn. Yeah. Carol,
I'm very liberal on wanting more ADUs.
okay.
yeah, I don't mind being more liberal on ADU. It's complicated. I want to see how this thing works out. I don't like I prefer simplicity in our rules,
Mhm.
and so I'm just wondering how it would work out. What kind of just how it would work out. I'm in favor of things being more liberal, but I like to keep it simple too.
Okay.
I guess I'd just be more concerned with where it's allowed and just the potential effects on the rural areas, if that's.
Are you sort of philosophically on the same page?
Yeah, that's what would be my biggest concern.
Okay.
Be able to see the impact of that in the rural landscape.
Sure.
I would agree with those, Bart and Tim, on that, definitely. I think I think what you're saying, Brian, is, which I agree with, is like it's getting too complicated to solve all the problems, So you just sort of have to take a leap in a direction of being more liberal, and then kind of accept maybe there's going to be a few things that you don't want to happen over the long run, and maybe you revise it a few years down the line. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I like the idea about the flats and center having.
Nick?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. So I'll actually just we'll jump off of where Boris ended there, because the issue with making housing bylaws a little stricter in the growth areas and the villages is that they're one and the same. So if the goal is to promote growth in those villages, to be more cautious and restrict growth goes against that idea, first of all. Same, and the same, the counter is the rural areas where, if it could be, hypothetically, that having an ADU and the extra income from a renter or an Airbnb on your rural property is what lets you keep it instead of subdividing, which, if you want to keep rural areas rural, subdivision in those areas is the thing to try to keep to the minimum. So it's not I don't think it's a total deal breaker either way, but that's just sort of my word of caution. The other thing is, specifically to the growth area, is that that's where, because of while laws are more liberal, as we pointed out, a lot of these lots are non-conforming, and so for a lot of people, their only option is sort of tearing down their home and rebuilding, like a duplex or something like that. Then their only option for adding more housing units is to do an ADU. So, to make it stricter for them to do so might be an issue. As for the rest of it, I didn't mean to complicate things with the categories. I see how I got a little out of hand quickly.
No, I think
What I was trying to drive at more is basically to sort of ask the question, is to really ask the question, maybe I should have started with this, what you were just asking, Brian. What's the goal of the ADU policy? And if the goal is to promote ADUs, the best way to do that is to tinker with the bylaws to make it easiest for the largest, to get the low-hanging fruit, to make it easier to do the thing that is already available, so that the bylaws aren't the limiting factor on doing that. And if we make it so that you have a structure that is duly permitted as an accessory structure and you want to turn that into an ADU, that's one, and you make it harder to do that, that suddenly becomes, the limiting factor is suddenly now the regulations, not the space and the land and the structures and the money to do it. So that's kind of, I think that's kind of the way I look at it, is that I think that our regulations should not, I think that to the extent that they can, we should avoid having them be the limiting factor in the development of something that everyone already agrees is a good thing. And if that good thing is we should have more ADUs, we should find ways to make sure that the limiting factor on ADUs is stuff that is already expressed in the regulations, by like, you can't have noisy, you can't like, have a lot of noise at the property line, or you can't like make a fool of yourself in public, basically, through various bylaws, or annoy your neighbors on purpose, that sort of stuff. Like, I don't like, so my point is, like, if those are already addressed, then we don't want to make a duplicate regulation to try to address those, the limiting factor for overall ADU growth in the village by mistake, So what I'm kind of getting at is like, I think what we got to do is sort of, pick where you want to see ADU, where people are comfortable seeing ADU growth, and try to also identify where the biggest possibilities for ADU growth are, and try to rectify or try to like make those work without, triggering some of the other possible deleterious effects, like, density or things being built too close to a lot line, or like too high density or something like that.
Making.
Can I ask for clarification?
Yep.
I think what you were saying was growth in the growth areas, and leave like the conservation areas more challenging. That I didn't say it right, but I think what you misinterpreted what you were saying.
Yeah.
You're saying make it easier to have ADUs
Easier
in flats.
Yeah.
Flats and center.
Right,
Yeah.
and leave the rules more or less as they are
Yep.
for the rest of the town.
Yep.
If you have 50 acres, fine, go ahead and,
More than enough room to put an ADU.
Right.
Yeah. Got it.
And the regulations are, it's kind of a no-brainer. If you have a bigger lot in a rural area, you can easily put one in. Or if you live in the town center, you have a lot more obstacles that you're working around.
So, like in the center, so
It's your turn,
if you
right?
want to make it more liberal, make it more liberal for the ADU rather than
Well,
for
I'm just trying to be.
structures.
No.
Then you get into that very nice situation where if I just want a structure next year, I think I'll do an ADU.
Yeah.
I also, maybe this is what you're saying, but I feel like it's very different if you're building a new structure. If you have a barn, and maybe this is, the non-conforming issues, but I can see being, okay, if you're in the village and someone has a garage already and they want to turn that into an ADU, that seems less obtrusive than all of a sudden they want to build a new building,
But if you're allowed to do building, close to the line, and the ADU or the dwelling unit is not supposed to be that close to a line, and get in that situation where I'll just build this close to the line. I don't want to do anything now. Well, next year I change my mind.
Yeah.
We just change the setbacks and lot coverage regulations in the growth centers that have more challenging lots, possibly.
Yeah, we want to allow a lot more.
Is the lot coverage a genuine issue for ADUs in the centers?
It's basically not an issue for anything in the centers.
It's
So
like half or something?
yeah, perhaps it would be good if we took a look at these, because I think we actually might be overthinking it a little bit. I mean, and maybe this is something to be shocking. Yeah.
We're planning.
So we're seeing, I mean, you see here, there's really only a 5 or even 3 foot difference in primary versus or principal versus accessory structures in the villages. So we're really at max, we're talking about a 5 foot difference between, between like we're talking about enforcing a difference perhaps of an ADU that's built 20 feet from a line or 15 feet from a wall line. Obviously, that is a bigger difference in the flats than it is in, up on top of the mountain. But, I'll leave it to you folks to decide whether or not it's that germane. And as far as lot coverage, you can cover 75% of a lot in the flats or the center here, any of the villages, with impervious surfaces and buildings, and 50% with buildings. So there's actually a lot of room. One of the big challenges is that some of the lots are so weirdly shaped that the setbacks create enough, like a pretty small building building envelope between that and having a driveway and a curb cut and a septic mound or something like that. You do run into limited space. So
wouldn't it be the simplest way to liberalize the ADUs would be to just have all structures that are built on the property, or all primary dwellings to be just as liberal as a structure of any kind.
I mean, if
To make those the same then,
simpler.
so there isn't a distinction, they're all 15 or 12.
You mean in everywhere or in the flats
Principal and
center?
accessory in the flats and center.
So if we made those the same, then that also addresses what Bart was saying, because we're not changing them in the other areas.
it also simplifies permitting a lot, I will say, a lot. That would be great.
Simplification is important.
Yeah.
Aren't almost all the lots non-conforming anyway?
Pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they couldn't meet the setbacks. Yeah.
So what would be an argument for not doing that? Is there one?
Tradition, I think, and
Well,
just the principle of there being a difference elsewhere. People might ask, well, why not for everywhere else?
Well, that's an easy answer. It's the growth area.
Yeah. That's true.
So even if we change those, though, sorry, this stuff, I'm just trying to think through for myself. Let's say we make those the same. The reality is most of the lots are non-conforming anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So the key is that David's language in B, we just have to make sure we get it right. So that if you have a non-conforming primary residence, you can put up your non-conforming ADU as long as it doesn't become more non-conforming.
Yeah.
Does that accomplish our goal?
It's too easy.
That's
Well,
We need to get David's language right, though.
so.
simplify the setback so that, principal and accessory are the same.
And would we drop, sorry to make it more complicated, but just to finish it out, would we drop the additional parking space for ADUs
In these two?
in the two growth areas?
So, I mean, that's a larger conversation, but trying to keep it narrow, I think there's a strong case for doing so.
I'm not trying to open up a new, I just feel like that's part of this. I don't know how people feel about it. I don't know how I feel about it, but it feels like it's got to be addressed.
I mean, let's put it this way. There's no way that someone's parking on the street or the sidewalk in the flats without getting a ticket. So, I mean, or getting yelled at. So, yeah, I mean, you would literally have to call the sheriff to have them come in and
Maybe it's between 6 and 8 a.m. when the sheriff's sitting in the full parking lot trying to write tickets.
So we've got, so there's nowhere for people to park out on the street for better or for worse. And so it really, I think removing the parking, it's sort of a philosophical thing almost, because it's like if your lot is so cramped that the limiting factor is a parking space, then you're going to be thinking already pretty hard about whether or not you've got space for another person and maybe an expansion on your house or whatever. So I think that there's a case to be made that, the town doesn't need to bother with regulating that if people are, because we can trust people to make that decision for themselves. There's nowhere else for an extra person on the lot to park. So if they're going to allow an extra person or persons on the lot, and that person or persons are bringing a car, then they're going to tell them, there's room. Then they're going to have to make up their mind before they go ahead and develop for an ADU whether or not there's space for an extra car. On the other hand, if people are really concerned about, parking displacement out into places where it's not supposed to be, like other private property or the right of way or something like that, then you leave this in and you give my office an extra mechanism to make sure that there is, quote unquote adequate parking. But I'm not, so I think those are the two
So we're talking
arguments.
about 3 places for
Yeah, I guess, yeah. And and this is where it gets complicated, of course, is because like, what if the reason why a house is non-conforming in the first place is because it doesn't have 2 parking spots? What are you gonna? Is there room to add another one if you want to build an ADU? Personally speaking, I think that this is I think that the parking requirements for this stuff is something that just doesn't need to exist, because it's something that someone who's building an ADU is perfectly capable of judging for themselves. And it's like, I think the town is not in the best position to make that determination all the time. But, we also have plenty of other parking requirements, so it's not like it's totally unprecedented.
I don't know.
So sorry, just thinking about one more thing to make sure that we really have it. So let's say you're in rural residential, Bart, and for some reason the house is non-conforming, like it was built too close to the lot line or something.
Right.
So then you could put your ADU in rural residential within the setback too, because it would not become more non-conforming.
You couldn't put it farther into the setback.
But you could put it the same distance in, which is, I don't think that's, you think that seems okay, right?
Yeah, it seems okay to me.
Is that how laws are written?
I'm asking Nick basically, like, let's say I'm 70 feet in Mount Mansfield Scenic Preservation with my house for some reason. Can I put my ADU within that same, can I just not violate it anymore?
Yeah, like if you're not expanding the footprint, then you're good. If you're
But
built
if you're expanding the footprint of a non-conforming lot, you're making it non-conforming.
Then you're making it more non-conforming.
Even if it's not
Got it.
going in, unless it's changed, right?
I think it's kind of I've always interpreted it to be, if you're not building farther into the setback, then you're not making the thing more non-conforming.
Okay, that's a change in how it used to be.
Yeah.
If you have a non-conforming lot, it's a non-conforming structure, it's non-conforming.
Okay,
You go
gotcha.
up.
Yeah.
But if you're changing that exterior footprint, even though where you're adding is like out back where you have the room, it still is making it more non-conforming.
Well, I think
I'm not saying that's right.
Yeah.
That's historically how it was interpreted.
Well, that's definitely not how
not necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is valuable. This is why it's valuable. To have.
Well, I think the state is trying to have the accessory dwellings have no additional regulations on them than the primary dwelling.
Yeah.
And so I think it should be, if it's already within the setback, then the accessory dwelling can be the same amount in the setback.
That's definitely a key point, because when you get in these growth areas, a lot of the ADUs will presumably be non-conforming, right along with the primary residence, which is also not.
So this is
No, and historically, it was just that I think people were very narrow-minded in their interpretation, and once it was non-conforming, it was non-conforming, even if it didn't make sense, that you had a big backyard that you could extend
From the setback.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, if someone knows better than me, then I'd really honestly like to hear about that, because I don't want to make a mistake if I have. But I've been interpreting it that that nonconformance would be increased if the thing that is the reason for nonconformance is being violated further. So if it's a setback, if you're building more into a setback, not gonna fly. But if you're, if you're modifying the structure that is non-conforming in a way that doesn't increase that amount of non-conformance, it doesn't continue
Then you're good.
to add to the violation, then you're good. Yeah. So
David, just to summarize on the stuff we have, just to make sure, because do you mind doing the revision? Do you mind doing the revision on this again?
Doing the, no,
Okay.
no, of course not, no, you got to.
So what I think we have is changing the accessory and primary setbacks in the table in the two growth areas to be the same.
Okay, what are you referring to here? B?
No, it wouldn't be on this page, unfortunately. It's on
No,
the chart.
yeah, I can send you that, but it's on
Could you
page
print
7
the-
of
could
the
you
chart.
print that
Yeah,
chart
I
out?
can do that right now.
It would be the chart and the individual pages,
For
right?
the two, oh yeah, so we need to print 3 pages.
So these are probably setback to you?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
but we'll print those, Royal we Nick. And then B, I think we need to tweak that language somehow, right? So it just says it's not making it more non-conforming.
Yeah, Nick was saying that we should add something in there also.
Yeah,
I mean, I could take a stab at writing that if you want, but all I was going to say is just kind of bring it in line with how we treat non-conforming
Yeah.
uses anyway.
I think that's the key though.
And just I don't want to harp on it, but just to be clear, I think writing it that way so that you're not increasing the degree of non-conformance would make it so that in the hypothetical that I brought up a couple times, someone who's got a duly permitted accessory structure that they want to, part of which or all of which they want to rebuild into or redevelop into an ADU would have to go through conditional use.
Say that again?
So let's say you've got a barn. It's it meets the setback for an accessory structure, not for the primary structure, the principal structure. You want to make an ADU out of that.
So you're
barn.
not in one of the growth centers now.
Yeah, not one of the growth
Changing.
centers. Yeah, exactly. Place where this actually applies because there's going to be differences
Yeah.
between the two. So we want to be clear that your language would make it so that person redeveloping their barn would have to go through a conditional use hearing for an ADU
I
to
think
put
you have
the
to because
barn. Okay, just want to be clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That is, I mean,
But the question, Caroline, you were mentioning, well, then it puts the burden on the development review board to, during the review process, to decide, well, shall we allow it or not, basically.
Right.
yeah.
And
Wouldn't it be better for us to decide that? And
the only standards might be just, do your neighbors object or not?
right, and
Right.
that's not a good basis for it, I don't think.
Might work okay, but I don't know how else, basically.
I think there's 2 other minor things. Sorry, in A2, David, I think it just says, it says sufficient water and wastewater. I think that's just a typo. Water and wastewater.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in A3, I'm wondering, to Brad's comment, do we want to add the words habitable floor area of the accessory dwelling unit?
It's habitable floor area.
No, but I'm saying in A3, do we want to refer to the habitable floor area of the accessory dwelling unit not exceeding 30% of the total habitable floor area of the single family dwelling?
Oh.
Because then that way, if you wanted to
Okay.
put it over your garage,
Yeah,
you're not
okay.
counting the garage
Just to
square
make it
footage.
really clear.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Right.
Sorry, say that again, accessory
Just
dwelling.
Copying this one, it says the habitable floor area of the ADU to refer to the habitable floor area of the
Yeah.
single family dwelling.
I'll look at some language on that.
Cool, thanks,
Yeah.
David. And then are we just gonna think about what we want to do for parking before the next meeting? If we want to do anything about parking? I guess, is there anyone who wants to change the parking in the village centers for the ADU? Do you think
I
that's
think you have
important?
to have parking, it's just gonna create problems. You don't have room.
Does anyone strongly feel that we should drop the additional parking space for ADUs in the center and flats, or?
Tell me
Doesn't
again what
feel to
it
be
what it
like
is
there is
exactly.
One per space.
You have to add one, it's 2 for the primary residence, and you have to have an extra one for the ADU.
Yeah, I think you should.
I mean, keep
I
in
think
mind,
it should be 2 overall. I mean, what if it's, someone that can't drive? It's your grandmother that's moving in there and you're requiring a space, because
yeah.
I also like your comment that you make do.
you do.
It's wide enough for 2 cars, you can park 4. Happens all the time.
And is a garage considered 2 parking spaces?
I would definitely consider it that.
Right.
Yeah. If a garage that's used for parking, So, and I mean, and if someone came to me and said, hey, listen, I'm renting a accessory dwelling unit from someone and they don't have a spot for me parking on the garage, on the the driveway, and their barn's full of crap, like I would say that would be a violation of our parking standards, and we'd be able to bring that. So I guess that is sort of the potential downside, but most places that I see, I mean, just using some anecdata for a minute here, like most places that I see, even in the flats and stuff, have space for a couple cars at least, and probably a third could be made. And I think, if you're going to have an ADU, maybe the sacrifice you're making is that you clean out the garage and like create a little and store like your winter vehicle in there or something like that. I mean, personally speaking, I think that the easiest solution for this would be to eliminate all parking minimums from the regulations entirely. I think that's the simplest and cleanest solution, and let people and most consistent one. But if there is a place that demands a loophole or an exception, while retaining the rest of them, I think that it would be ADUs.
Is there strong feeling among folks one way or the other on dropping the extra parking space for the ADUs in the center and flats?
I think we should.
You think we should drop it?
Mhm.
How do you feel, Bart?
Yeah, I could drop it.
Drop it? Drop it?
Well, okay.
Chairman Morris?
I think you could drop it, but you have to take into account plowing and things in the winter, so you have to make a functional access
Yeah,
out of necessity anyway.
true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine with dropping it. Unless, is there other recourse for like, if you're talking about a tenant that has to park in Jericho Market parking lot or something?
Yeah.
Is there other recourse for them, or is it just they move?
I mean, my solution to that would be to put in a provision that says that that like a tenant shall be provided with adequate parking, and then the choice could be up to the landowner to sacrifice one of their own existing parking spaces or create a new one, basically.
Do you want to take
in the driveway, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a crack at parking?
Yeah, I mean, I can do that.
So eliminate the ADU spot, but do the thing you just said.
Yeah,
Which
sure.
is make, the language regarding you have to give a tenant adequate parking.
Yeah, if they need a vehicle. Yeah, I could take a crack at
Do you
that.
mind?
Yeah, I mean, I should probably check to make sure that we're allowed to do that. I mean,
That would be key.
I'm not, we have no provisions about rent specific to renters, and I don't know if that's a coincidence or if that's because of some kind of statutory requirement, so
So
we
we
should check
parking
on
with
that.
you on ADU.
Yeah, I'll check up on that one. And if it's too complicated, we just leave it the way it is. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So are we also talking about aligning the setbacks?
Yes, I have those pages for you. He printed them, I was gonna give them to you. Yep. Here,
Okay,
I circled the sections where,
yeah,
they just need to conform
yeah.
for the flats and
Okay.
they're all right there.
Oh,
They
okay,
printed them.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Brian, I think the only, to finish this thing off, I think the only thing that's kind of hanging in my mind is what David was saying, that we're throwing this to the DRB to decide about accessory structures that are existing, and do we let somebody make that an ADU? And shouldn't we just make it clear one way or the other?
For the rural areas.
Yeah.
You mean if the existing structure is non-conforming? That's the
No.
only circle we have left, right?
The existing structure is conforming, but when it's changed to an
But not for
ADU,
It goes from accessory to dwelling.
yeah. We're
But
saying
it would
that,
have to be non-conforming. wouldn't it have to be non-conforming?
I think the argument is that by attempting a conversion, by proposing a conversion from purely accessory structure that is otherwise conforming with those specific rules to a accessory structure that now has a dwelling function as well.
But that would still be conforming.
But they would for the accessory structure.
Why wouldn't that be okay?
Well, I guess it wouldn't be okay under, the argument is that I think the implication is that changing it from purely an accessory structure to an accessory structure with an ADU makes it non-conforming if it doesn't meet the standards for like
For the primary residence in that district.
Yeah.
Right? So the only time Boris's example is not covered, and maybe we want to cover it, unless I'm misunderstanding something, is someone has a barn
Yeah.
that's within the setback. Yeah, you know what I'm saying very unartfully. Yeah, it feels like it's a really narrow thing. Maybe we need to address it though. But it's like the barn that we want to convert in this instance does not meet the setback requirements.
Yeah, that's
that it would have to be habitable, but it does for a non-habitable.
That's what I think we would call category 4.
So you'd have to be in like that 50 feet of the setback difference in the
Right, and what we were saying was, well, the DRB gets to
that
decide.
would go to the DRB.
And the DRB then has to kind of weigh, well, is it okay with the neighbors? And that's how the decision gets made. And is it okay to do it that way?
Well, okay, so I think we're maybe talking about slightly different things, or there's maybe different kinds of confusions we need to settle. So in my mind, it's quite clear. If you have a barn that is non-conforming as a barn, like let's say the reason it's non-conformance is that it's too close to the property line.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That seems, and you want to convert that to an ADU, that seems
to the DRB.
Off to the DRB. That's the way we do it right now, and that should probably stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those other ones where it works as a barn, it's permitted as a barn, it meets that minimum setback as a barn, but it wouldn't if you had proposed it as a house? Is changing it to an ADU enough of a change that it should go to conditional use, or is there a way to address it in these regulations prescriptively so that the person knows what the person proposing it knows what to do?
And the only place this applies is in a non-growth area because we're changing the setbacks to be exactly the same in those two, so it's impossible.
Yeah, we can forget about the village center.
It's a pretty narrow set of, I'm sure there's a building that falls in it, but
it's fairly narrow, yeah.
Do you ever experienced anything like that?
Well, I mean, kind of, yeah. So, I mean, let's look at Mike Moore's place on Irish Settlement Road. His barn is duly permitted. I mean, he went and got an ADU permit for that barn, so it's kind of a moot point, but let's pretend he hadn't done that. His barn is too close to it wouldn't work as a house. If you propose that building but a house, that would not work because it's too close to the road. But his house, which is just a few feet away, it works fine as a house because it meets the setback. So the question is, again, pretending that he hadn't gotten it permitted already, imagine he wanted to convert the upper part of his barn to an ADU once the barn's already been built and meets the minimum setbacks for a barn. Is that worth a conditional use hearing? That conversion, is that worth a conditional use hearing, or is there some way that we can address it in preemptively in the regulations? Maybe we won't get to that tonight, but I think that's the question that still I don't feel has been adequately addressed, because right now I think I would have to enforce it so that any conversion of any structure would have to go to conditional use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably bears a little bit more talking about. And the reason I brought up the categories is because I don't know this for sure, but I strongly suspect that a large category of potential ADUs are in this current category that we're talking about, of structures that are fine right now as accessory structures, but wouldn't be permitted as a dwelling if you pitched it now today as a dwelling.
You could actually put in the regulations that neighbors' approval of the setback would be the standard by which to allow it. I mean, the setback really is something that affects the neighbors anyway.
Mhm.
And that's the only thing they should,
Yeah, but then
nothing
you're
else.
just, say a neighbor says no, then you're just pitting neighbor against neighbor. It should be the rules.
Neighbor or neighbor.
It could be that way, but
Yeah.
it could be the other way too.
One option
Well,
would
I
be
don't know,
site plan
there's no other
review.
standard basically that you can set that I know of. I can't imagine any other.
Why don't
The
we make,
setback is really just, it's a neighborly thing that we have the setback even.
why don't we make all the other changes and put this on next meeting's agenda along with the village, or
I like
along
that.
with the town.
The town center thing. And I'll add just one other thing to
Because it
that.
doesn't feel like a 1 minute discussion.
I think you're right about that. But just so we're clear about what we're talking about here, also keep in mind that, zoning, both DRB decisions and zoning permits for things like this are appealable. So even if, the neighbors had a problem with it, but it was allowed by permit, they still have it's not like just giving out a permit for an ADU conversion means that it's happening. They have no say. If someone has an issue, and a abutter has an issue with someone converting their barn that's located closer to the property line than a single family home would be to an ADU, then they could appeal that zoning permit decision. And they can do that right now. That's currently an
To the
option.
DRB,
To the DRB, yeah.
and then it goes to Superior Court.
If the DRB can't handle it, yeah, exactly. But yeah, so there is an appeals. We don't have to get any farther than that, but like there is an appeals process built into all of these things that we're talking about. I think it's good to remind people that exists, and that it's also very infrequently used currently under the rules.
All right, I've gotten a subtle hint from a member of the commission, David, that can I get a motion to adjourn? Second? Joan, Sandy, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, David.
35.